The ground consisted of dirt, the odd cigarette butt, and even a strong aroma of elephant remains. A smell so bad, a player got sick in the stomach and threw up. With a stat line that looked like this, and everything else that led up to this game, this has to be the worst playoff game in NFL history. Okay, this is a throwback, even for this channel, but I found this story fascinating and hilarious. And by the way, if you're new here, welcome. This is NFL Unveiled, and if you like old school football, you're in the right place, because that's all we talk about. In the early days of football, and I'm talking really early, 1932 to be precise, there was no schedule. Teams made their own. This meant some teams played more games than others. Yeah, the early days of football were messy. There was also no playoff or title games. The champion was whoever had the best win percentage. But the problem was, the calculation ignored ties. With no overtime, and given games were much lower scoring back then, ties were very common. So this was a pretty ridiculous calculation. I mean, if a team won a single game, lost 0, and tied 9, they'd have a better win percentage than a team that went 9-1. With 3 weeks left to go in the 1932 season, this is what the standings were looking like. So yeah, despite the Packers having a far better record, it was a tight three-way race. The Packers had a chance to lock up another title in the second to last week of the season, as they went to face the Portsmouth Spartans, who the following season became the Detroit Lions. But they got clobbered, completing only 1 of 16 passes, losing 19-0, and falling out of the title race. So that left the standings looking like this going into the final week of the season. The Bears also won their game that week. The Spartans had finished their season, but the Bears had one more game against the Packers. If they won, they'd have the same record as the Spartans. After 3 scoreless quarters, shocker, the Bears scored a touchdown and kicked a field goal to win 9-0. Now the Spartans and Bears were tied. There was a tiebreaker though. If each team won a single game, the winner of the second game would be awarded the tiebreaker and therefore the championship. Oh, okay, well, that's not going to work then, is it? Instead of having co-champions, thank God, Bears owner George Halas would ask Spartans owner Harry Snyder about having a playoff game to decide the champion. Snyder agreed and they got permission to play the first impromptu playoff game. Although technically it was an extension of the regular season instead of a championship game, so it was recorded as a regular season game and the loser actually would finish third behind the Packers. Leading into the game, the weather in Chicago was miserable. The weather was bad against the Packers, and it was only getting worse. A snowstorm was in full effect, so they decided to host the game indoors. This would be the first indoor game in league history. But there was a slight problem. It was a hockey stadium, so obviously it was not designed to handle a football game. It was truly makeshift, as the field was only 80 yards long and 10 yards narrower. So because the field was smaller, they had to make some weird adjustments. For example, the teams kicked off from the 10-yard line, there were no field goals allowed, and when a team crossed midfield, it was immediately brought back 20 yards to create more space. The stadium also kept a supply of dirt and would reuse it to save money. Over time, other stuff began to accumulate, like sticks and cigarette butts, and there was some elephant waste. So you could say not ideal playing conditions. But worse than this, at least for the Spartans, was that their future Hall of Fame quarterback, Dutch Clark, couldn't play. Given he led the NFL in scoring with 55 points, this would be a bit of a blow. Clark was a basketball coach for Colorado College, and given this game was not on the original schedule, he could not get the time off. Yeah, that was the state of football in 1932. Despite a sold-out crowd and a fascinating build-up to this game, the matchup itself was fairly lackluster, scoreless for 3 quarters, and many probably thought, oh my god, another tie. The questionable materials in the ground left players struggling to get their footing. The Spartans had an opportunity to score when Glenn Presnell tripped before getting to the end zone. Also, the reduced size of the field made it difficult for either offense to really get anything going. Passes, punts, and kickoffs all flew into the stands. But then, with less than 5 minutes left, the Bears intercepted a pass and returned it to the 7-yard line. As per the rules, if you got knocked out of bounds, you lost a down. After a couple run attempts came up short, it was now 4th and goal from the 2-yard line. Remember, no field goals. Star fullback Bronco Nagurski got the ball, faked a run, then passed to a wide open Red Grange for a touchdown. Immediately after this, the Spartans coach, Potsy Clark, rushed onto the field protesting the play. This was because the rule at the time required a passer to be at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and Clark argued that he was not. The play stood, but it did lead to an important rule change the following year. Forward passes became legal anywhere behind the line of scrimmage. Shortly after, a botch snap led to a Spartan safety, and the Bears won 9-0. These were the miserable stats of the game. 8 first downs for the Bears, 5 for the Spartans. The Spartans went 2 of 12 on 28 yards, 5 passes were intercepted. The Bears weren't much better either, completing 3 of 16 passes for 18 yards, and 3 of those were intercepted. But hey, at least they threw a touchdown. The following season, the league was split into 2 divisions, with the winner of each playing in a championship game. Thankfully, there would be no more ties. You also had the introduction of the hash marks, so during this game, there was a fence surrounding the field, right next to the sideline. So to create more space, after the ball went out of bounds, they moved it 10 yards in from the sideline. Despite this rather sloppy execution, the game did generate a significant amount of press coverage when the NFL needed it, at least relatively. This is at a time when not many people were paying attention to the NFL. And so, the stage had been set for pro football's ascendance as the nation's pastime.